There's a person you know. Maybe it's someone close to you. Maybe it's someone you barely understand. They don't rush to fill silence. They don't need a crowd to feel okay. They go home early, or they never really came at all. They seem fine with that. Genuinely fine. And something about that disturbs you. Not because there's anything wrong with them, because somewhere in the back of your mind, you wonder if they know something you don't. Most people were taught that connection equals health, that wanting to be alone is a symptom of something broken, isolation, depression, fear, trauma. We built an entire social mythology around togetherness. No man is an island. You need people. You should put yourself out there. But here's what nobody tells you. Some of the most psychologically complex, self-aware, emotionally intelligent people alive prefer to be alone. And the reason why will change the way you see quietness forever. The hidden psychology behind solitude. Let's get something clear from the start. We're not talking about people who are alone because they're afraid. We're not talking about social anxiety dressed up as preference. We're not talking about trauma that locked someone inside themselves. We're talking about something entirely different. We're talking about people who could be in the crowd, who could charm a room, who have enough social skill to play the game, and consciously, deliberately, chose not to. That distinction matters, because psychology identifies a very specific personality architecture here. Researchers call it high autonomy orientation. Some link it to strong introversion. Others point to something called dispositional solitude, a genuine, stable, internally motivated preference for time alone that isn't driven by avoidance, but by value. These people don't hate others. That's the first thing most people get wrong. They don't find people irritating in the way a misanthrope does. They find people draining in the way a phone drains when too many apps are running at once. It's not judgment, it's energy management. And they became fluent in that language early. The question is, why them? Why does one person walk into a crowded room and feel alive, while another walks into the exact same room and immediately starts calculating the fastest exit? The answer starts somewhere most people never think to look. It starts in the nervous system. Why they pull away, and why it's not what you think. Here's a concept that rewired how neuroscientists think about human personality. In the 1960s, a psychologist named Hans Eysenck proposed something that was controversial at the time. He argued that introverts and extroverts don't just behave differently, their brains are actually running at different baseline arousal levels. Extroverts are chronically understimulated. Their nervous system craves input, noise, movement, people. Social situations give them the hit their brain is always searching for. But introverts, and especially people who genuinely prefer solitude, are already running hot. Their baseline arousal level is higher, which means the same social environment that energizes one person physically overloads another. This isn't a metaphor, it's neurology. When people who prefer solitude enter a loud, high-energy social environment, their brain processes more of it, more faces, more emotional micro-expressions, more conversational layers, more subtext. They're not being antisocial. They're being overwhelmed by information that other people aren't even processing. And here's where it starts to get strange, because this capacity to process more, this heightened perceptual sensitivity, doesn't disappear when they're alone. It turns inward. When these people are by themselves, that same processing power gets directed at thought, at memory, at meaning, at emotion, at the deep internal narratives that most people never sit still long enough to hear. In other words, they become extraordinarily self-aware, not perfectly self-aware, not better than anyone else, but the sheer volume of time spent in quiet with no social performance required, no approval to chase, no role to play, it creates a kind of psychological depth that most people never develop. And that depth, it changes what they need and what they're willing to accept. But this is where it gets disturbing, because the very gift that makes solitude feel natural to them is also the thing that makes certain human interactions feel genuinely unbearable. What they observe that others never see. There's something that happens to people who spend a lot of time observing rather than performing. They start to see through things. Social performances become visible to them the way stagecraft becomes visible to a theater director. They watch someone laugh a second too loudly and sense the insecurity underneath. They feel the energy shift in a room before the conflict breaks. They notice who looks for validation after every sentence, who interrupts, who performs kindness versus who practices it. This isn't arrogance. Most of them don't feel superior. They feel tired, because you cannot unsee something once your brain learns to process it. And when every social interaction becomes a decoding exercise, when you can feel the gap between what someone says and what they mean, when small talk sounds hollow because you can hear the hollow, you start to understand why being alone feels like relief. There's a term in social psychology called emotional labor, the invisible, exhausting work of managing your own emotional expressions to match what a situation demands. Smiling when you're not happy, nodding when you don't agree, performing enthusiasm for conversations you find meaningless. Most people do this unconsciously. They learned early that social belonging required it, and so it became automatic. But people who prefer solitude, they feel that labor acutely, every second of it. It registers the way a physical weight would, and over time, they stop being willing to carry it unless the relationship genuinely deserves it. Which means, when they do let someone in, it's never casual. When they choose you, they've already weighed 1,000 things about you. Your consistency, your honesty, whether what you say and what you do match, whether they feel real around you or whether they feel like they're performing again. They don't give access easily, because access costs them something. But here's what nobody notices about that: the signs people misread. Completely. People get this wrong constantly. They see someone declining plans and they think lonely, depressed, antisocial, avoidant. They see the canceled dinners, the "I'd rather stay in," the unanswered messages, and they build a narrative. Something must be wrong with them. But the signs that look like isolation from the outside often look like restoration from the inside. Watch carefully. When a person who genuinely prefers solitude cancels plans, they don't spiral into guilt the way someone with social anxiety does. They don't obsessively worry about what you think. They feel a quiet exhale, a return to themselves. The guilt might come later, briefly, but the primary sensation is relief. When they're alone, they're not waiting for the phone to ring. They're not refreshing social media to see what they're missing. They're occupied, not with distraction, but with themselves, reading, thinking, creating, processing. The difference between chosen solitude and painful loneliness lives in one place: contentment. A lonely person alone feels the absence of connection like a wound. A person who genuinely prefers solitude alone feels the presence of themselves like a completion. These are opposite psychological states that look identical from the outside. And this misreading causes real damage. Because when well-meaning people push someone like this, "You should get out more. You're too isolated. It's not healthy to be alone so much," they're not helping. They're communicating that this person's natural state is a disorder, that their instincts are wrong, that they need to be fixed. And for people who already spend enormous time questioning their own internal experience, that message lands deep. But here's the psychological twist that almost nobody talks about. Nobody expects. These people are not anti-love. That's the twist. People who prefer solitude don't crave human connection less. In many cases, psychology suggests they crave it more deeply, but they've raised the bar for what connection actually means. Researcher Esther Buchholz spent years studying what she called the need for alone time alongside the need for attachment, arguing they're not opposites, but complementary drives. The same person who needs deep solitude may simultaneously need profound connection. Not more connection, not wider connection, deeper. What they resist is surface-level connection. What they refuse is the performance of closeness without the substance of it. What depletes them is presence without meaning, being in a room full of people and feeling completely unseen. Because here's what chronic solitude seekers know, often without being able to articulate it: you can be lonelier in a crowd than you ever are alone. People who prefer being alone aren't missing something. In many cases, they found something quiet and inconvenient and real that most people will spend their entire lives running from. They found out that needing people and performing for people are two completely different things, and they stopped confusing one for the other. If something in this hit a nerve, if you recognized yourself or someone you love, maybe the question isn't, what's wrong with them? Maybe the question is, what are you afraid you'd find if you were alone long enough to actually listen?